Sit still, or I will make this worse for you, Officer Ryan Callahan said coldly, his voice dripping with contempt, completely unaware that the quiet black woman in front of him would soon be the one deciding how long he would spend behind bars. What he believed was just another act of control would turn into the moment that destroyed his entire career, because the woman he chose to humiliate was not powerless at all. She was a judge who would later sentence him to 15 years in prison. Before we go any further, comment where in the world you are watching from and make sure to subscribe because tomorrow's story is one you don't want to miss. The late afternoon sun hung low over a quiet corner of Birmingham, Alabama, casting long shadows across the cracked pavement outside a small convenience store that had seen better days. A worn wooden bench sat near the entrance, its paint faded and peeling, and on that bench sat Evelyn Carter. She was dressed simply, a modest blouse, neatly pressed slacks, and practical shoes, the kind of appearance that invited no attention, that blended easily into the background of everyday life. In her hands rested a small leather bag, placed carefully in her lap, her posture upright, composed, as though even in stillness she carried a sense of order that others overlooked. People passed by without noticing her. A man stepped out of the store with a soda, glancing briefly in her direction before looking away. A woman hurried past, keys already in hand, focused on her own routine. To them, Evelyn was invisible, just another person waiting, another quiet presence in a place people moved through without memory. But there was something in the way she observed the world, her eyes steady, her breathing measured, that suggested something deeper, something disciplined beneath the surface. Across the parking lot, a patrol car rolled slowly into view, its tires crunching softly over gravel. It did not stop immediately. Instead, it circled once, then again, as if searching for a reason to justify its presence. Inside, Officer Ryan Callahan leaned forward slightly, his gaze fixed on Evelyn with a narrowing intensity that had less to do with observation and more to do with judgment already formed. He did not see a woman waiting. He saw suspicion. He saw an opportunity. The patrol car came to a stop just a few feet away. The engine idled briefly before the door swung open with deliberate force. Callahan stepped out, adjusting his uniform, his posture already projecting authority before a single word was spoken. His boots struck the pavement with a steady rhythm as he approached, each step deliberate, each step reinforcing the control he believed he held. Evelyn did not move. She did not look away. She simply lifted her eyes to meet him as he stopped in front of her, his shadow stretching across her feet. "You've been sitting here long?" he asked, though his tone made it clear he was not asking out of curiosity. Evelyn's voice was calm when she answered, steady and unshaken. "Long enough," she said. The simplicity of her response seemed to irritate him instantly. His jaw tightened slightly, his eyes narrowing as the quiet moment between them began to shift into something far more consequential than either of the bystanders passing through that parking lot could have ever imagined. The tension between them did not ease. It sharpened, tightening into something more deliberate as Officer Ryan Callahan leaned slightly closer, his presence no longer just authoritative, but invasive. "Long enough for what?" he pressed, his voice edged with suspicion, as if the answer itself was already wrong before she gave it. Evelyn Carter did not shift. Her posture remained upright, composed, her hands resting calmly over the leather bag in her lap. "For the day to pass," she replied, her tone even measured. The answer seemed to irritate him more than silence would have. Callahan let out a short breath, shaking his head as if dismissing her entirely. "You think you could just sit out here and not answer questions?" he said, his voice rising slightly, enough to draw a glance from a man exiting the store. "You think that is how this works?" Evelyn lifted her eyes again, meeting his gaze without challenge, without submission. "I have answered you," she said. The calm in her voice only deepened his frustration. "No," Callahan snapped, "you've gave me attitude." He reached for his radio without breaking eye contact. "Dispatch. I have out a situation. Possible loitering, suspicious individual. Requesting backup." The words came quickly, decisively, turning a quiet moment into something official, something escalating. The faint crackle of acknowledgement came through almost immediately. Evelyn remained seated, her expression unchanged, as though the arrival of more officers held no weight for her at all. "Stand up," Callahan ordered. This time, there was no pretense of a request. Evelyn adjusted her bag slightly, then rose to her feet with slow precision, her movements controlled, her posture steady. That alone seemed to unsettle him. "Hands where I can see them," he added quickly. Evelyn raised her hands calmly, her fingers relaxed, her gaze steady. The distant sound of another patrol car began to approach, faint at first, then growing louder, the low hum of its engine cutting through the quiet rhythm of the street. Callahan stepped around her slightly, studying her from a different angle, as if searching for something that justified what he had already decided. "You got identification?" he asked abruptly. "Yes," Evelyn replied. "Then show it," he snapped. She moved carefully, reaching toward her bag. "Slow," he barked again, his hand hovering near his belt, his voice sharp with unnecessary urgency. Evelyn paused mid-motion, then withdrew her hand, returning it to view. "You told me to show it," she said quietly. "I am." The contradiction irritated him, though he would not acknowledge it. "You do it the way I say," he replied, his tone defensive now. The second patrol car pulled into the lot, gravel crunching under its tires as another officer stepped out, glancing between them with growing curiosity. The situation had expanded, no longer a simple question, but a display. Callahan straightened, his voice louder, more assertive. "Step away from the bag," he ordered. Evelyn complied without hesitation, stepping back a single pace, her hands still visible, her posture unchanged. The line between routine and escalation had been crossed completely, and as the second officer approached, standing just behind Callahan, the moment shifted into something far more deliberate, something driven not by necessity, but by assumption, and only one of them understood where that would lead. The presence of the second officer did not calm the situation, it intensified it, turning a quiet parking lot into something sharper, more performative, as Officer Ryan Callahan stepped forward again, reclaiming the center of control as if the additional witness validated everything he was about to do. "You see this?" he said loudly, gesturing toward Evelyn Carter as the backup officer approached. "Refusing to cooperate, acting suspicious, cannot even follow basic instructions." The second officer, Miller, slowed as he reached them, his eyes moving from Callahan to Evelyn, taking in her stillness, her raised hands, her composed posture. "What is going on?" he asked, his tone neutral but attentive. "What is going on?" Callahan repeated, his voice rising, "is that she is not answering questions and she is not complying." Evelyn turned her head slightly, just enough to speak clearly. "I have answered every question," she said calmly. The contradiction lingered, quiet but undeniable. Miller hesitated, his gaze flickering between them. Callahan did not give him time to think. "We are detaining her," he said firmly, already reaching for Evelyn's wrist without warning. His grip was immediate, tight, unnecessary. Evelyn did not resist. She allowed her arm to be taken, her balance adjusting naturally as he pulled her slightly forward. "You are making this more difficult than it needs to be," he said, his voice low, edged with irritation. "I am not resisting," Evelyn replied, her tone steady. "That is not for you to decide," Callahan snapped, pulling her other arm behind her back with more force than required. The metal cuffs appeared in his hand, catching the sunlight for a brief moment before closing around her wrist with a sharp click. The sound seemed louder than it should have been. Miller stepped closer, watching carefully now, his earlier neutrality beginning to shift into uncertainty. "Ryan," he said quietly, "do we have cause?" The question carried weight. Callahan did not look at him. "I said we are detaining her," he replied, his tone final. He secured the second cuff, tightening it slightly, asserting control rather than necessity. Evelyn stood restrained, yet unchanged, her posture still upright, her presence still calm, stoic, commanding. Around them, the small crowd had grown. A woman near her car paused, watching. Another person lingered near the entrance, phone raised slightly, recording. The moment had expanded beyond them. "You are coming with us," Callahan said, placing a firm hand against Evelyn's shoulder, guiding her forward with unnecessary pressure. Evelyn adjusted her steps without resistance, her gaze forward. "Very well," she said softly. The simplicity unsettled him again. He opened the patrol car door, the sound hollow against the tension. "Watch your head," Miller said automatically, though his voice lacked conviction. Evelyn lowered herself into the back seat with controlled precision, her hands still restrained, her posture composed even within confinement. The door closed with a firm sound. Callahan stood there for a moment, looking through the window, expecting something, anything. But there was nothing. Only calm, only stillness. And as he turned away, walking back toward the front of the vehicle, something invisible had already begun to shift, something that would soon make everything he had just done impossible to ignore. The patrol car door shut with a hollow, final sound, sealing Evelyn Carter inside the back seat as the engine idled and the flashing lights continued to pulse across the parking lot, painting everything in sharp, alternating colors. Officer Ryan Callahan slid into the driver's seat, adjusting the rearview mirror almost immediately, angling it just enough to keep her in view. Their eyes met briefly through the reflection. Hers were steady, calm, unchanged. His lingered for a moment, something unreadable flickering beneath the surface before he looked away. "You know," he said, starting the engine, his tone edged with irritation that had not settled. "Most people would have said something by now." Evelyn remained silent. The cruiser pulled forward, gravel crunching beneath the tires as they left the lot and merged onto the street. The world outside moved as if nothing had happened, cars passing, pedestrians walking, unaware of the imbalance contained inside the vehicle. "They usually explain themselves," Callahan continued, his voice louder now, as if trying to force a reaction. "They tell me what they are doing, why they are there. Makes things easier." He glanced back again through the mirror. "But you just sit there." Evelyn's voice came softly, measured. "You did not ask for an explanation." The statement landed clean, precise, and for a moment, Callahan did not respond. His grip tightened slightly on the steering wheel. "I asked enough," he said finally. "You just did not give me what I needed." The cruiser turned into the station parking lot, the building rising ahead, familiar, controlled, reinforcing the authority he believed he still held. He parked sharply, cutting the engine with a quick motion. The silence that followed felt heavier than the noise that had come before. He stepped out, walking around to the back door and pulling it open. "Out," he ordered. Evelyn shifted carefully, stepping out without resistance, her posture upright, her movements controlled despite the restraints. Inside the station, the lighting changed instantly, colder, harsher, the hum of fluorescent bulbs replacing the warmth of the outside world. A few officers looked up briefly as they entered, their attention lingering just long enough to register something unusual. Callahan guided her forward with a firm hand at her arm, his grip unnecessary but deliberate. "Processing," he said curtly to the desk officer, who nodded without question. The back room was smaller, quieter, a single chair placed under direct light. "See, Callahan instructed." Evelyn lowered herself into the chair with slow precision, her hands still secured behind her back, her breathing steady. Callahan stood in front of her now, looking down, his expression tightening as if the situation still demanded something more. "You think sitting there like that changes anything?" he asked, his voice lower, controlled. Evelyn looked up at him, her gaze unwavering. "No," she said. "I think what you do next does." The words lingered, heavier than the space allowed. Behind him, Miller paused near the doorway, his posture uncertain now, his silence more noticeable. Callahan exhaled sharply, turning away for a moment, his eyes scanning the room before settling on the counter. The clippers. He stared at them just long enough for the moment to shift, just long enough for the line he was about to cross to become unmistakably clear. Then he reached for them, the low hum beginning as the machine came to life, steady, mechanical, and irreversible as he turned back toward her, the room tightening around what was about to happen. The low mechanical hum of the clippers filled the room, steady, unrelenting, cutting through the silence in a way that no voice had managed to, and for the first time, the tension was no longer about what might happen, but about what already was. Officer Ryan Callahan stepped closer, the device in his hand vibrating with quiet intent. His expression hardened into something more deliberate, more personal than before. "You still think this is going to work out for you?" he said, his voice low, almost conversational, but edged with something colder beneath it. Evelyn Carter sat perfectly still, her posture upright despite the restraints, her hands secured behind her back, her gaze forward calm, stoic, commanding in a way that did not match her position. "I think," she said softly, "you are deciding how it ends." The words did not slow him. If anything, they pushed him further. He reached forward, placing his hand firmly against the back of the chair, adjusting her position. "Without care. Let us see how calm you are after this," he muttered. Behind him, Miller shifted uneasily near the doorway, his voice low, cautious. "Ryan, this is not necessary." Callahan did not turn. "Stay out of it," he snapped, the authority in his tone immediate, cutting off any further hesitation. The room fell quiet again, except for the steady hum. Then the clippers touched her hair. A soft, mechanical sound followed as the first pass was made, slow, deliberate. Strands fell, drifting downward, settling onto the floor without resistance. Evelyn did not move. She did not flinch. Her breathing remained even, her expression unchanged, her presence unshaken. Callahan continued, his movements controlled, methodical now, as if completing something he had already committed to. "You could have made this easier," he said, though his voice lacked the certainty it once carried. "You just had to cooperate." Evelyn's voice came again, calm, steady. "I did," she said. "You just did not understand what that meant." The words lingered between each movement of the clippers. Another pass. More hair fell. The discomfort in the room grew, visible now in the shifting posture of the officers, in the silence that no one broke. One officer turned slightly away. Another remained still, but no longer met the moment directly. Miller did not move, his eyes fixed on the scene, his unease unmistakable. Callahan finished, stepping back as he switched off the clippers. The sudden silence felt heavier than the sound that had filled the room. He looked at her, waiting, expecting something, anger, fear, reaction. But there was nothing. Only stillness, only control, only the same quiet presence that had unsettled him from the beginning. Evelyn lifted her eyes slightly, meeting his gaze once more. "You should write everything down," she said softly. "Exactly how it happened." Callahan let out a short laugh, dismissive, though it lacked strength. "Yeah," he said, "I will." He turned away, placing the clippers back on the counter with a careless motion, as if the act itself carried no weight. But the room knew, the silence knew, and as Evelyn sat there, unchanged in everything that mattered, it became clear that something irreversible had just taken place, something that would not be undone, only answered. The silence after the clippers stopped did not feel empty. It felt complete, as if the room itself understood that something irreversible had already been set into motion, and Officer Ryan Callahan, standing there with his back partially turned, tried to reassemble his authority piece by piece through routine. "All right," he said after a moment, his tone forced into something procedural. "We are done here." He reached for a clipboard, flipping through paperwork with quick, impatient movements, the sound of pages cutting sharply through the quiet. "No charges," he added, almost dismissively. "Nothing worth holding." Evelyn Carter remained seated for a moment longer, then rose slowly to her feet, her movements controlled, deliberate, her posture unchanged despite everything that had just been done. She stood facing him, her gaze steady. "You should document everything carefully," she said. Callahan glanced up, a faint smirk returning, though it lacked the confidence it once carried. "I always do," he replied. Evelyn took a single step forward, closing the space just enough that her voice carried with quiet precision. Then make sure you include what happened here, she continued. Not what you think it was. What actually was. The room shifted again, not visibly, but undeniably. Miller's posture tightened near the doorway. Another officer looked down, avoiding the moment entirely. Callahan's smirk thinned slightly, his eyes narrowing. You keep talking like this matters, he said. Like someone is going to care. Evelyn held his gaze. They will, she replied. The certainty in her voice did not rise, but it deepened, settling into the space between them. For a brief moment, Callahan said nothing. Then he let out a short laugh, shaking his head as he stepped closer, his voice lowering, colder now. You think you are in a position to do anything about this? He asked. Evelyn did not hesitate. I think you still have time to stop, she said. The words were not dramatic. They were not emotional. They were precise. Final. Remove the cuffs. Acknowledge what you did. And this ends differently. The offer hung in the air, quiet but unmistakable. The last exit. The last moment where the path could still change. Miller glanced between them, his expression tense, sensing something he could not fully name. Callahan's jaw tightened. For a fraction of a second, something flickered, hesitation, recognition, something dangerously close to understanding. Then it was gone. He shook his head, a short, dismissive laugh breaking the moment completely. No, he said. I think I'm exactly where I am supposed to be. He turned away, placing the clipboard down with a sharp motion. You are free to go, he added, his tone final, as if ending the moment erased it. Evelyn watched him for a long, quiet second. Then she spoke, her voice softer than before, but carrying more weight than anything she had said yet. That was your last chance. Callahan did not turn back. Yeah, he replied. I will take my chances. And in that moment, without realizing it, he sealed the outcome that had been waiting for him all along. The words, I will take my chances, had barely left Officer Ryan Callahan's mouth when the shift began, not loudly, not suddenly, but with a quiet precision that felt almost inevitable. The door to the processing room opened, not with force, but with purpose. Every officer in the room turned. 3 individuals stepped inside, their posture composed, their presence carrying an authority that did not need to be announced. At the center stood Attorney Marcus Hale, his gaze steady as it moved across the room before settling directly on Evelyn Carter. There was no surprise in his expression, only recognition. Your Honor, he said softly, offering a slight nod. The room tightened instantly. Callahan froze where he stood, his back still partially turned, the words not fully registering at first. Slowly, he turned around. His eyes moved from Hale to Evelyn, then back again, confusion rising into something sharper, something colder. What is this? He asked, though his voice had already begun to lose its edge. Hale did not raise his voice. Officer Callahan, he said calmly, you are being placed under immediate investigation for unlawful detention, abuse of authority, and violation of civil rights. Each word landed with quiet finality. Callahan stared at him, then at Evelyn again, his mind struggling to connect what he was seeing with what he believed. That does not make sense, he said, his voice uneven now. He stopped. The sentence could not finish, because in that moment, Evelyn reached into her bag and retrieved a small leather case. She opened it slowly, deliberately, and held it forward. The badge, the credentials, the seal. Judge Evelyn Carter. The room went completely still. The silence that followed was absolute. Callahan's face drained of color, his posture shifting almost imperceptibly as the realization settled in, not gradually, but all at once. No, he said quietly, more to himself than anyone else. You could have said something. Evelyn closed the case gently, her movements controlled, her expression unchanged. I did, she replied. You chose not to listen. The weight of that truth pressed into the room, into him, into everything that had just happened. Behind him, one of the officials stepped forward. Turn around, he said. The command was calm, but it carried more authority than anything Callahan had said all day. This time, there was no hesitation, no argument, Callahan turned slowly, his hands moving behind his back without resistance. The cuffs closed around his wrists with a sharp click. The same sound he had used on others now echoed differently. He did not look up. He could not. The arrogance was gone. In its place was something far quieter. Fear. And standing just a few feet away, unchanged in every way that mattered, Evelyn Carter did not raise her voice, did not step forward, did not need to assert anything at all. Because in that moment, the truth had already done it for her. The sharp click of the cuffs, closing around Officer Ryan Callahan's wrists, echoed through the room with a weight that silenced everything, a sound that no longer belonged to him, but to the consequences he could no longer avoid. He stood there, frozen, his shoulders no longer squared with authority, but lowered under the pressure of what had just been revealed. "You have the right to remain silent," one of the officials said, his tone calm, procedural, each word reinforcing the reality, settling into place. Callahan swallowed, his breathing uneven now, his eyes fixed somewhere ahead but seeing nothing clearly, his mind struggling to process how quickly everything had shifted. Just moments ago, he had controlled this room. Now he stood inside it as its subject. Around him, the other officers remained silent, their earlier confidence gone, replaced by stillness and quiet discomfort. Miller lowered his gaze, the weight of what he had witnessed settling heavily into his posture. No one stepped forward. No one defended him. There was nothing left to defend. Attorney Marcus Hale moved slightly closer, his voice steady, precise. "Every action taken here has been recorded," he said. "From the moment of detention to the conduct inside this room. There is no ambiguity." The words stripped away the last fragile layer of denial Callahan might have held on to. I did not know," Callahan said quietly, his voice no longer firm, no longer controlled. Evelyn Carter stood just a few feet away, her posture unchanged, calm, stoic, commanding, her presence untouched by everything that had happened. "You did not ask," she replied. The distinction landed with quiet finality. The officials guided Callahan forward, their movements controlled, deliberate, as they turned him toward the door. Each step he took mirrored the ones he had forced on others, but now stripped of authority, stripped of certainty. The same doorway he had entered with confidence now felt narrower, heavier, impossible to avoid. Outside the room, the station seemed quieter, the usual movement subdued, as if even the building itself understood the shift that had taken place. Officers glanced briefly, then looked away, recognizing enough without needing explanation. As Callahan was led down the hallway, his head lowered, his presence diminished, the contrast became unmistakable. The man who had once raised his voice to assert control now said nothing at all. Behind him, the room settled into stillness. The clippers remained on the counter, silent now. The meaning transformed from an act of dominance into evidence. Hale turned toward Evelyn, offering a small, respectful nod. "We will proceed immediately," he said. Evelyn returned the nod, her expression calm, unchanged. There was no triumph in her presence, no visible satisfaction, only resolution. And as the door closed behind Callahan, the imbalance that had once filled the room disappeared completely, replaced by something far more enduring, justice that did not need to announce itself, because it had already been fulfilled. The door closed softly behind Officer Ryan Callahan, and with it, the last trace of tension seemed to leave the room, not abruptly, but gradually, like a storm passing into the distance. The processing area settled into a calm that felt earned, not imposed, the harsh fluorescent light no longer oppressive, but simply present. The clippers remained on the counter, silent now, their purpose transformed into something else entirely, not an instrument of control, but a reminder of what had been done and what it had cost. Evelyn Carter stood in the center of the room, her posture unchanged, her presence calm, stoic, commanding, just as it had been from the beginning. She reached up briefly, her hand brushing lightly across her head, not with distress, not with loss, but with quiet acknowledgement, as if even that moment had already been placed exactly where it belonged. Around her, the officers who remained moved more carefully now, their voices lowered, their actions measured, the weight of what had unfolded settling into the space between them. No one challenged her. No one questioned her. The shift was complete. Attorney Marcus Hale spoke quietly with the officials nearby, his tone precise, ensuring that every detail would be preserved, every action accounted for, the system now moving forward with the clarity it had lacked before. Evelyn gave a small nod when he finished, her expression steady, her voice calm. "Thank you," she said. There was no triumph in it, no satisfaction, only resolution. She turned toward the exit, her steps unhurried, deliberate, each movement carrying the same quiet control that had defined her from the start. The hallway beyond felt different, quieter, as officers stepped aside without being asked, their posture reflecting a respect that had not existed before. Outside, the late afternoon sun cast a warm light across the pavement, soft and steady, as if the world itself had already returned to balance. Cars passed in the distance. Voices carried faintly. Life continued. Evelyn paused for a moment, her gaze lifting slightly toward the light, her expression unchanged. Then she adjusted the strap of her bag and continued forward, her pace steady, the direction certain. In the distance, the courthouse stood, composed and unwavering, a place where decisions were not forced, but made with clarity. That was where she belonged. That was where this story would find its final shape. And as she walked toward it, there was no sign of victory in her steps, no outward display of what had been set in motion. Only the quiet presence of someone who had never needed to prove anything at all, because the truth, once revealed, had already done it for her. What makes this story linger is not the severity of the punishment, but the quiet moment when it could have been avoided. Officer Callahan was not undone by a single decision, but by his refusal to recognize the boundaries of his own authority, even when they were placed directly in front of him. Evelyn Carter did not overpower him. She allowed him to reveal himself fully, without interruption, until there was nothing left to explain. That is what makes this different. The outcome was not driven by emotion, but by exposure. It shows how fragile authority becomes when it depends entirely on control rather than accountability. The most striking part is not that justice arrived, but that it had been present the entire time, waiting for the moment it was no longer ignored. In that sense, the story is less about power changing hands and more about truth reclaiming its place. I hope you enjoyed that story. Please share it with your friends and subscribe so that you do not miss out on the next one. In the meantime, I have handpicked 2 stories for you that I think you will enjoy. Have a great day.